that. So, give them examples of what we're doing now, because we're further along than most people know, but we're not near where we could be. So Steve Stoner brought that up last night, or yesterday's meeting too, is that is an opportunity. We're getting some recognition as a sustainable community. I'm not sure we deserve it, but we can live on our reputation and earn it. And I think we can show that return. But I think showing that baseline, like the PowerPoint I had yesterday, just kind of, it's a report card of where we're at right now according to the mayor's climate agreement. And every one of those 12 categories we've touched, but we haven't completed.
Mike, you mentioned Hunter Levens, and she's a national expert in this area, and she co-authored with Amory Levens and Paul Hawken a book called Natural Capitalism. And it's not an easy read, but it's a very valuable resource for a community like this. And certainly that would be a great resource to help you do some of these things.
So, if we can come up with the cash, we'll have her come maybe, and then maybe we could put that presentation with hers if you're interested in doing that. But she wants to come because she's doing a book tour right now.
Yeah, and if you could add incentive if you give her a horse to ride while she's here.
We'd like to get the PowerPoint too from you.
Yep, I gave it to Nicole. So.
Okay, great. Let me see, where are we? Bob, healthy food and healthy lifestyles.
Okay, the group I was with really dug into the local food part of it first and foremost. Excuse me. And it was a combination of different things. They talked a lot about community gardens, first of all, but they went far beyond that. They talked about farmers markets and the need for more farmers markets, maybe spread out a little bit more geographically, and certainly more availability for more days of the week. Just a little better level of variety and quantity of produce. Along with that went the education regarding gardening in general, just people gardening, where they can garden, what's available, looking for spaces that are available for gardening throughout the city, not just in backyard gardens, but particularly for people that are living in a little more dense areas of the city, finding places where we can establish what I call guerrilla gardens almost. We've got, we look for a spot, and if there's room, we can do it. And one of the examples that came up was when 10th Street was redone, the 10th Street underpass. If you remember, as you came to the underpass on the left-hand side, there was that one-way street that got closed, and there was a suggestion put in for the DOT that would be, that's about 250 feet by probably 12 to 15 feet of soil, and the suggestion was put in that we have gardens there, and that was absolutely ridiculous to the DOT, but that would have been several garden plots right there. That's just an example of where you could find that, because some people don't have the ground to garden in. But the point being, you can look for opportunities in public projects, you can look for opportunities for gardening in just about anything we do when there's new development, rehab, or public roadway projects. And then promotion of local foods and healthy lifestyles through eating. And the whole thing, it works down the chain. You don't have the transportation costs. You may pay a little bit more for your product, but you're probably going to get a better product, a fresher product, and certainly a product that doesn't have to be trucked in from Texas and California and South America. Second thing we talked about in terms of healthy lifestyle was Linda Coates was at our table, so no surprise we talked about the arts being a necessity for the overall health of the individual and our population, and that we need to promote the arts. And we talked a little bit about a 1%. We talked a little bit about just providing opportunities again for and defining a place for the arts in our community. And we didn't talk very much about actual physical health. We got so wrapped up in the first two that at the end we just said, well, we had a little bit of a discussion about the climate isn't very good here, so we need to have some place to go in the winter so we can continue. And other people said, well, we got to, like we said before, this is where we live. We got to accept it and do what we can. So we came up with a statement at the end. We just need to promote year-round physical activity, again, for the overall health. Linda, if you got any? Okay.
Thank you, Bob. Nicole, do you want to hit on natural resources, environment?
Sure. Our group, great group, very positive. They mainly wanted to build upon our existing strengths. They were very appreciative of the natural resources that we had in our community, helped identify Fargo. They're the ones that came up with the less destination and more integrated. They're specifically talking about parks, trails, open space, community gardens. They were talking about how the fact that they have to get in their car and drive all the way to the north side or south side to get to a community garden. Or also parks, the fact that a lot of the great large parks are along the river, and so it's all the way, if you live on the west side of town, to get all the way to Lindenwood or Oak Grove or some of those parks. So they really like to see the neighborhoods, pocket parks, more open space, more integrated in their day-to-day lifestyle. They saw the need to capitalize on renewable resources, and then also specifically preservation and conservation, and not losing sight to what we already have. They'd like to incentivize smarter choices by businesses, such as recycling at bars. We had one young gal that said her generation is just appalled that none of the bars recycle their beer bottles. And so if you think about how many beer bottles are consumed on a weekend, that'd be quite a bit.
does.
Yeah. And so, and then lastly, they came up, they had 5 actually, was public education, and both public education, using that, integrating school children and our young community into learning about the natural resources in our community, as well as for the public, and really being, again, they were talking about that leadership and Fargo being an example for others.
Thanks, Nicole. Eric?
Sure. Well, first off, sorry about being late. I'm Eric Dodds. I probably know some of you. So Stephen asked me to moderate the flood mitigation topic, and I was initially a little bit scared, figuring there was 100 people in the room and they'd probably be all at my table. But as was mentioned earlier, really flood was a big portion of last night, but when it came to the breakout session, I think we had a pretty small table. Dave was there as well. Probably 3 general public people, and then a handful of others that, city or on the team here. So it was a good discussion. I think some of the comments earlier that there seems to be a little bit of confusion about flood mitigation was evident from the comments. But at the end of all that, the 3 main themes that came away was, 1, don't lose. There's a pretty broad and deep understanding that if we lose, it's a bad, bad day. And, you see Minot, and we know what Grand Forks went through, and others. So I think that was important. Second one was that everybody felt that we needed permanent protection. And I tried to grill the audience a little bit about, well, what does that mean? Is that a diversion? Is it retention? Is it 500-year? Is it, what is it? And I don't know that anybody really knew. All they knew was that we need permanent protection. As an engineer, I guess I feel like, well, let's define that. Is it 500? Is it what is it? And everybody said, well, we need high-level protection. So that was important. And then the third thing was generally a recognition of the insurance impacts, and being in a floodplain and required flood insurance will have a big impact on growth of the community, and there's a concern about what that'll mean for the future of Fargo. So those were the main 3 points.
Thank you, Eric. Good summary. On housing in neighborhoods, Dan facilitated that group, and I remember they had a good conversation that really boiled down to making sure there was a diversity of house choices and that neighborhoods were really strong. And I think throughout the tables there was this idea of thinking about Fargo and its neighborhoods and the amenities that are provided and the connections that are built, and I do believe that that's a theme that we can carry through the plan. So I want to shift us now to the last question, because it is really an important one for us, and it's about what does a successful plan look like? And I think from experience we know that the best written plan in the world is actually worse than the worst written plan if the group that creates it doesn't carry it forward. So really this is even more about the process that we go through together and the momentum that's built. And so I'd like us to talk for a few minutes both about some of the specific things that you'd like to see addressed in the plan, but also how we can ensure that the process that we're going through together is one that creates momentum and is nurturing for the final strategy that we all agree upon. So, does anybody have any thoughts about what a successful comprehensive plan would look like or how it would work?
Einstein said, you know, there are things that you can count that don't really count, but there's things that really count that you can't count. So that's a really good saying, I think. And really, when it boils down to, I think you can tell when you're successful by people's attitude and a smile on their face, a general sense of community. So is that measurable? I don't know. You can look around and you can tell if people are miserable or if they're happy. Not every day. Everybody's going to be happy, but that's something. But the reason that this thing is even funded is because of the Department of Energy's grant for the $1 million EECBG, and there's requirements. So the reduction in energy, reduction in emissions, there's tangible, measurable needs that we have to provide out of this plan. But there's a lot of things that are going to go into that. So what we expect, or I expect at least from this committee and from this consultant's work, is a matrix where we can establish those benchmarks with measurable results to see if our strategies are achieving the goals that we have to meet according to the terms of the grant.
Just to clarify, too, the scope of this work is not $1 million.
No, that's right. The other 700.
I wish.
This is 250,000, and 750 has already been put into place for energy efficiency, and we're already getting returns. Just on one parking ramp, we're saving $13,000 a year just because of a $35,000 investment. So those are the types of things, baseline, that we can share with the public.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that this group can really help us with, because there are thousands of metrics in the world, and we've worked with a lot of them, and some of them are better than others, but it's also really important to pick the ones that are you're much better off with a small number of good metrics than a large number that confuse people. So next time we'll be back with some, and you can help us decipher which are the ones you want to be tracking.
Great.
I think to some degree the success of this is kind of based on how far you want to push the boundaries. I think there's a lot of good things that everybody kind of threw out last night and things that have been talked about today. But I think it ultimately comes down to how far and if you want to push some of this stuff by goals, policies, objectives within the comp plan. I think it really comes down to how innovative and how far you want to push those boundaries on some of these items.
It's a good point, and that's a good question for this group too, because we've seen the way that we've been talking about it is oftentimes the bigger plan is easier to accomplish than the kind of medium-sized plan, and the reason for that is it's more inspiring for people. I mean, they can get excited about it and really bite into it. I think that's also a little bit counter to what we've heard about the culture here of incrementally changing and continually getting better rather than throwing the Hail Mary. And so part of the challenge here is going to be to try to come up with an inspirational vision, and that can be achieved incrementally. And so how far we set that vision out, I think, is something that this group is really going to need to be focused on to make sure whatever it is that we're helping to craft is something that is inspiring and achievable. Yep, please.
I think Mike touched on it too, because the whole concept last night was to think out of the box and encourage. But what his point, I think, is it has to be measurable things, though. That's the only way you're going to really know if this was really a worthwhile or a real process and not just a bunch of lofty ideas that aren't going to happen. So I think it's really important to stay focused that whatever we come up with, there's a way of measuring whether it's being accomplished over time. And whether, of course, time will only tell, but, yeah.
I think
Please.
Once the plan is put in its final form, the objectives need to be integrated into the cities, whether it be planning for neighborhoods, how your dollars are going to be spent. It has to be integrated into your budgeting, your transportation.